That doesn't mean that people who don't go to movies and don't talk about them aren't learning anything. They're learning in a very abstracted form of imitation. So then you don't go to a movie. You go to 100 movies and you imitate something that's common across 100 movies. What's that? Well, that's an archetype, something that is common across 100 narratives, if you will, not just movies. The hero archetype, okay? Christ is an archetype because he is the archetypal example of taking on responsibility and being willing to sacrifice everything to follow through with that responsibility. And that is the archetype, and every person is supposed to imitate that, and not be an imitation of it, but to follow that example as of, I'm going to also take on responsibility and be willing to bear the cost of that responsibility as well. That's what we should be doing. So the 4 types of knowing, propositional knowing, procedural, and perspective and participatory. And propositional knowing is about conviction of truth claims. Procedural knowing is like knowing how to catch a baseball. It's engagement, practical demonstration of empowerment, the ability to do something. All right. And perspectival knowing is having an optimal grip on a situation, knowing what all the moving pieces are and what from your perspective and where you fit in the tool. And then participatory knowing is attunement and connectedness, and that continuity of contact is what John Vervaeke says. That continuity of contact, that attunement and connectedness with the arena and agency relationship. Now, if you put these things together, the faith that's connected with this, we walk by faith, not by sight. We tend to think that, some people would tend to think, and I would tend to think in the past, that would mean that, I'm just walking by faith, I'm just trusting God, and I don't know where I'm going. And that's not what that means at all. Walking by faith and not by sight means that there is a vision of a better future out there that only where there's no vision, the people perish. You have a vision of it and you can picture it, and you pull all the resources and leadership together and you take on the responsibility to make that vision happen. Imagine like a bridge engineer. There is no bridge there. He walks by faith, not by sight. He has to fully commit himself to the end state of that bridge existing before it's there while nobody can see it. So he has faith in something that nobody can see, but it's not blind faith in something that it has no bearing on reality, can't be measured, tested, that kind of thing. So it's something that transformation, that thing that you're aiming for is something that you can envision, okay? And that thing that you can envision, you're going to have to alter and modify that over time and change it because, what do you know? What do you know about life? So you're going to learn every day and you're going to modify that, and you have to aim for something or you'll be destroyed. So we're in this situation where we don't have enough information to have the perfect thing to aim for because we're flawed. But if you don't aim for something, you won't get anywhere. So you have to start aiming at something and modify what it is that you're aiming at as you go, okay? And continue to improve both yourself and the concept of the thing that you think you're aiming at. All right, so it's a constant attunement, if you will, and a constant calibration has to keep going on. You have to involve your discernment and all that. Western Christianity today is focused almost solely on propositional knowing. I know that, or I believe that XYZ is true, conviction, that kind of thing. And that to the exclusion of these other things. Now, I'm not going to take the time right now to get into that issue, but as we go forward in this analysis of this character, I think you'll understand these 4 types of knowing. So the zombie trope in our culture, there's a bunch of zombie movies coming out. I think the first zombie movie came out in like 1926. And there's lots of different kinds of zombies, but basically you have a creature that is mindless. Oftentimes the person is either dead or undead, or they're being controlled by something else. Some of the cartoons and the older movies, they have people walking around like this, and somebody's controlling them with like a little radio controller, or a voodoo spell or something like that. And there was one movie where a guy was walking around back from the 40s, and he's like, I's a zombie. It's kind of funny. So the idea, it is the zombie trope is, and there's some more information on this that I could share, some of it that I haven't read through yet that I want to get into, but essentially it's a picture of the meaning crisis that's happening in our Western culture, to where people have no meaning in their life and they're latching on to these ideologies, propositional ideologies, and those ideologies, they're ideologically possessed. So those ideologies are, that's the mastermind. That's the man behind the curtain controlling the little radio signal, controlling all the zombies, making them all follow this singular purpose. And, a lot of zombies, they just have that one singular drive of, in the 80s movies, brains. Why do they want to eat brains? Zombies get your brains, okay? There's something about zombies that messes with your head. It makes you have no agency or cognitive capability. It's a complete narrowing of cognitive capability down to one thing that's decided by something or someone else, okay? And if somebody's ideologically possessed, like we've talked about before on this channel, how Calvinists are ideologically possessed, they are controlled by that one thing. They're essentially a zombie. They're ideologically and cognitively a zombie. They are more or less stronger and weaker versions of this one virus of Calvinism that, it's one thing that can infect people. And that's what's in control. They don't have it. It has them. And that's the main ideology we talk about on this channel. But any ideology could be like that. All right. And that one in particular, though, there's reasons for that that we talk about in other videos. We'll talk about the difference between Kairos and Kronos. There's two Greek words that show up that get translated as time. And the first one is Kronos. And it could be a season, a while, a space, oftentimes. And the Kronos is typically something in your life that you would expect. It's the day-to-day stuff. It's week to week, or significant events that you knew were coming, like when it's time to go to college, when it's time to get a job, when it's time to set up retirement. Those things aren't ordinary, average, every day, but they're coming. You expect them. They're kind of linear events, if you will. If you were to map out your life and say, okay, this is kind of when I'm going to go to college. Here's the kind of career I'm going to have, and then I'm going to retire, that kind of stuff like that. It's linear and expected those things to happen. And then the Kairos, so the Kronos shows up 53 times. Kairos shows up 87 times. Kairos in the Bible is like in 2 Corinthians 6:2, where it says, now is the accepted time, now is the day of salvation. Kairos is it's a limited period of time that is an opportune or seasonable time, something that has come to fruition. It could be a disruption, a non-linearity. Okay, think in your life, when something happens in your life, like when a relationship ends or when somebody dies unexpectedly, that is a Kairos event. Okay, I have some explanations of a Kairos. Somebody said, and I've try to listen to some other people talking about what a Kairos is. And in the Kairos, we are in a period of time where a system is sensitive to our actions. There's a big timing issue to this. An action that would be important 5 weeks ago or 5 weeks from now might make a big difference in the system. Or an action right now might make a difference now that might not have made a difference 5 weeks ago or 5 weeks from now. I think Jordan Hall was the one that actually said this stuff. A period of time where non-typical actions can have a huge impact on the systemic course of the future. And if you think of the systemic course of things, the example that Jordan Hall gave was, imagine a steel ball rolling through. If you ever played that game Labyrinth, where you move the little wood panels around, try to get the steel ball through the maze. Well, imagine a steel ball moving in a deep groove in the wood to where you couldn't dig it out if you wanted to, and it's just moving along. I mean, you'd really have to do something significant to get that ball out of there. So it's kind of fixed and set. And that's kind of analogous to trying to change things in our culture. If you try to change things in your denomination or in the government, it's probably not going to happen. It is on a set course. A Kairos, imagine that groove in which the steel ball is rolling gets shallower and shallower and shallower till pretty soon there isn't one at all. And you've gone from a situation to where the future is set, fixed, and determined, and everybody pretty much knows what's going to happen, to where suddenly anything can happen. That ball can go anywhere. And the decisions that you make at that point in time are much more impactful than decisions you make while that ball is stuck in that groove. And that ball, that's our culture, that's our lives. Everything is moving along in that groove. And some things you couldn't change if you wanted to during Kronos times period. But when the Kairos happens, it can either be a disaster, an absolute disaster. Sometimes a disaster causes it, or you can act in such a way to turn it into an opportunity where we can take systemic failures that we had during the Kronos and then implement the positive changes during the Kairos. So it's important to understand that it is atypical behavior, and you have to spend your time in the Kronos preparing for the Kairos. So when the Kairos happens, you have to act. Now, the Bible has some stuff to say about the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. When you're following the letter of the law, you have to do these things. People get rigid and militant about these things and legalistic about these things, and those are Kronos things. Typically, and like I said in one of my previous videos in the Awakening the Spirit series, in the conference room that we filmed, is that pre-transformational stuff. Almost all the instructions in the New Testament are pre-transformational instructions, kind of like, how to behave in a waiting room before you get called to the back. It's pre-transformational instructions. It is not. So once you are transformed, you are now in a situation, especially when you're transformed and in a Kairos event, where everything, you have to make the decision of what is right on the moment, and there is no system, there is no ethical code or moral code that tells you, that could possibly tell you the right thing to do or the right time to do it during the Kairos event. That is especially when transformed sovereign people are absolutely needed the most. And you could say that this COVID-19 is a Kairos. People might argue with that, and there's a couple different things you could argue. Okay, is the disease causing the Kairos? That's debatable. Is our reaction to the disease causing the Kairos? That's debatable. If our reaction to the disease is causing the Kairos, is it because there's some nefarious plan? Or is it because of the ineptitude and incompetence of the leaders making the decisions? So there's a decision tree you could go with there and trying to nail this down. But the point is, we are in it. And you have to view this situation, if you're not a decision maker at that level where you can make a huge difference, you just have to realize that whether it's the disease or the government, whether it's corruption or ineptitude, regardless of what that is, this is the environment in which you have to operate, and you have to figure out what you're going to do in this environment.